car headed back from our hunt in North Dakota where we thoroughly got our butts kicked. And Jared and I were going over all the things that we would have done differently and what happened. And Jared's really the only one that got on bucks, as you saw if you watched the video series. But we were just going back and forth, and we were like, man, this should be a podcast, because if anybody wants to do this, they can learn a lot.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was a really tough hunt. I mean, we like Greg said, we got our butts kicked this week, and we went into it thinking, sitting in trees was going to work. We were hunting private land, so we had out some bait. It's totally legal here, and before we came up here, we had how many bucks on camera? Like several bucks.
A bunch of bucks. Nothing big,
but some nice bucks.
Nice bucks. Insert trail cam videos here.
Yeah. But we got up here and the cameras pretty much just shut down. We had nothing on camera.
Yeah. And like Jared said, this was a totally different strategy from last year. So last year we came up and we hunted all public land, and we did pretty well.
Yeah, we did really well.
But it was different. We had different weather. It was much hotter this year. And we were talking about how the terrain last year was much more kind of what are in our comfort zone, right?
Yep. More run and gun stuff, timber, setting up on terrain features, hunting the river, oxbows in the river, acorns, typical whitetail setups that we're used to. But we came out here farther west, and there's a lot less timber. I mean, very, very little timber. You got shelter belts, you got some old homesteads that have some trees around them, and that's literally about all you have for timber. And the rest of it is corn, beans, and cattail swamps.
Yep.
Or marshes. There's no trees in the marsh. It's just, they call them potholes out here. It's just a hole of water basically with cattails around it in the middle or between crop fields. So
last year it was kind of like a traditional whitetail setup that we're used to. Find sign, climb a tree, find a food source, find a funnel, get in the tree. That's what we did. This year we did opposite. Private land. This year all private. We hunted all private, and we actually set over some baits, which not really my favorite way to do it, but this is the way that it's done apparently up here, so we did it. Now, that's not to say that we didn't work our butts off, because we did. We came up before the season, we scouted a whole bunch of spots, we set up like 10 or 15 trees, we prepped them, we cameraed them, we got baits, all that stuff.
It's a lot of work.
We put in a ton of work, but none of it paid off. Like, none of it. We had cameras we were getting pictures of bucks before the season, and by the time the season rolled around, I don't know if the warmer weather had them coming out of velvet early, because we did notice that. There was a lot of bucks that were hardhorn much earlier than they were last year. So I don't know if the weather, but anyway, they just weren't where we were trying to hunt them. And really, Jared is the only one that adapted to the situation. Me and Ernie, we just kind of kept hunting the same. I mean, we moved around, right? So
right.
mid hunt, I went out and I set up 5 new spots that we'd never been in, scouted new spots. So it wasn't like we were just sitting back doing nothing, but we just had the wrong strategy. So my moral of the story is, you can work your butt off, but if you have the wrong strategy, it's just not going to work.
Yeah, I mean, I realized pretty early in the hunt, just looking at trail camera pictures, when the bucks were getting there, they're not getting there until well after dark.
We only had a few showing up in daylight.
So I realized pretty quick, and I'll say this, what helped me realize that pretty quick was the spot that we hunted first, or that I hunted first. There was one of those little potholes like 100 yards from our tree, and I could see a good ways. So we were glassing the edge of that pothole where all those cattails were, and we were seeing deer in the cattails moving in daylight up on their feet 2 hours, 3 hours before dark. And I was like, those deer are bedding in those cattails, and they're not making it to these bait piles in the daylight. So the first night we saw several does and a small buck get up out of those cattails, and work the edge of this cornfield, going back into some heavy cover. Like, they weren't heading toward bait piles, they were just headed toward, a different habitat.
Towards 500 acres of corn, standing corn.
Yeah, exactly. So, I sat in the tree, two nights I sat in the tree, and I watched the deer do the same exact thing. So, I realized then you just need to get out of the tree and, hunt them where they're coming out of, get in tight to where they're bedding. So, we ditched the tree. I wore a saddle twice this week, and we ended up hunting on the ground. Like, I saw what those deer did, and we moved right in. We planned an access route. The wind was right for it. We moved in. We made a blind in the corn. We sat in the corn, and we had deer in range immediately. It was like the first hunt we had deer in range. All does, but we had a couple of really cool encounters, like super close encounters with some giant mature does. And when we moved onto the ground and started glassing the other side of the lake is when we saw that absolute giant buck, 160 plus inch 10 point, just a giant mature buck. And we saw him, we saw a couple other bucks do the same exact thing. We hunted it another night, saw the bucks do the same thing. So my plan yesterday was the last day of the hunt, was to glass in the morning and try to put a buck to bed. Like, see where he goes in the cattails, see where he beds down, then move in for the afternoon hunt. So that's exactly what we did. We got up early, we went in, we spotted the big 160. We watched him J-hook into his bed. So we put a plan together. We were going to go after him, but it was my fault. There was a section of this farmer's property that he doesn't allow any hunting. It's like a sanctuary. So I was mistaken on where that boundary was. So I was watching that buck and patterning that buck in a spot that I couldn't hunt. So I basically wasted probably 3 days out of the whole trip doing that. So on the last night, I just completely abandoned that spot and went to a new spot that had the same type of habitat and cover, and we probably had the best hunt that I've ever had, or one of the most interesting hunts I've ever had, for sure.
What's frustrating about that on my end is when we were driving up here, intellectually I knew, we talked about it a lot. We were driving past all these little potholes, and I was saying, I bet there's a 200-inch deer there laying in that little pothole, or look at those, that marsh with the cattails. And I was like, there's giants in there. But then I never tried to hunt that, and that's, looking back, I'm pretty frustrated that I didn't learn faster, because intellectually I knew the right answer, but I wasn't willing to change my tactics. I committed to a strategy early on without knowing this type of terrain in this area and never really hunting in it before. What I should have done is followed my own advice. I don't know how many times I've said it on podcasts and in videos and to other people, that if you come up on an out-of-state hunt to new terrain, if you'll spend your first couple of days just scouting and learning the area, it'll pay off big time. And we were talking about that in the car, and we were like, man, if we'd have sat on a glass and knob, or as Stephen Ranella calls it, on a glass and tit, if we'd have sat there, 2 or 3 of us maybe spread out on different glass and tits, I would bet my paycheck we would have seen the same things. Yep. We would have seen those bucks stand up in the potholes, in the marsh grass, in the cattails, and we'd have seen them feed around there and then make their way, real close to dark towards beans, corn, alfalfa, whatever groceries they were going to get that night. I bet that's what we would have seen. And I think it would have changed our strategies earlier in the hunt, instead of me wasting is maybe not the right answer, but choosing the wrong strategy for the entirety of the hunt. So I'm frustrated with myself that I didn't learn faster.
Yeah, it's so tough on these out-of-state trips when you've only got 4 or 5 days. You have to be so quick to adapt, and you have to be really quick to realize you're doing the wrong thing. But sometimes that's really hard to do, because you may feel the sign is there. You're seeing deer sign. You may feel like you're set up right, but if you're not seeing the deer, I mean, you've got to change something pretty quick to be successful. And I mean, I realized pretty quick that I just need to get out of the tree and hunt on the ground. And I'm not good at hunting on the ground. It's not something I do very often. It's something I need to do more of because I think it's a killer tactic, especially in areas like this where there's no trees. I think if you can, if your ground game is pretty good, your success rate is going to be so much higher. But, spotting and stalking and stuff like that it's not easy to do. It definitely takes a lot of practice and stuff like that. But, I mean, I got within range of a buck on the last night, got within 45 yards of him, and it just didn't work out. But I'm pretty happy with that fact that I was at least able to get in range of a buck after observing what they do and then kind of figuring that out and then, making it happen that way.
Yeah, it's another thing that we always say, and kind of our group, we always say this, and again, shame on me, I'm a freaking idiot, I didn't listen to my own speech, is a golfer carries more than one club. And when it makes sense to use a saddle, use a saddle. When it makes sense to use a heated box blind, use a heated box blind. And when it makes sense to go at them on the ground, go at them on the ground. Well, I didn't use that tactic, and I should have.
I mean, I was sitting on a bucket in a cornfield.
A bucket in a cornfield.
A white bucket in a cornfield.
I'm going to add that to my speech. When it makes sense to use a bucket in a cornfield, use a bucket in a cornfield.
I was thinking that, man. I was like, how many deer have been killed doing exactly that, sitting on a bucket in a cornfield? I bet it's a bunch. It has to be.
Well, you almost got it done with a bow. Imagine if you had a rifle out here.
Oh, I would have been tagged out super quick. But I mean,
that and that's another thing is that. So I'm one of these guys. I don't hate on other people for different tactics that they use. Not at all. If it's legal and that's what makes you happy, then I say go for it. But I'm not one typically to hunt like. Well, I haven't hunted bait piles in, I don't know, since I was a kid in Florida. And I kind of thought that, private land, bait piles, like that's cheating. That's easy. It's freaking not.
It's really not.
It's not. It wasn't at least this trip. We did it. There was no pressure because it was opening weekend in North Dakota, which is like, I think it's like the 5th least populated state in the country. There's just not a lot of hunters here, and there's so much land. So they're unpressured deer on private land, and we were baiting them, and it still wasn't effective. So that was something else that I learned, that maybe I need to shut up and quit being an arrogant prick, thinking that my public land tactics are better than the other, because it's just not true.
It's all work.
It's all work. It's just how do you go about the work?
Exactly. Yeah. And I was thinking too, you got these deer have all this food. Why are they going to move a quarter mile in daylight to come to your bait pile when they're not going to pass up all this other food to get to you in the daylight? They're just not going to.
Nope.
I mean, and another thing we learned on this trip too is that deer will eat cattail reeds.
Yeah.
I mean, we watched it all week. So you got to think, these big bucks are laying in these cattail reeds, and they've got all the food they need right there. They got water. They can go 15 yards to the edge of corn and eat corn or beans.
They've got everything they need in a 100-yard circle.
Yeah, they don't need to come to a bait pile.
Talk about the wind-based bedding that you saw on the last night.
Yeah, so we watched several bucks get up out of their beds this week, and they 100% bed based on wind in these cattails. So the way we saw them bed is they were bedding right on the edge of water with the wind at their back, and they're facing the water. So they can see out across that water. They got a wide open view. They got the wind coming over their back, and you cannot touch them. I mean, the cattails are 10 feet tall. I don't know. They're super tall.
They're not quite 10, but they're over your head.
Yeah, they're over your head. I mean, for a deer, they're twice as tall as a deer.
Yeah.
So these bucks were bedding based on that, and we saw it over and over and over again. I mean, we sat where we sat the last night. We could see roughly 1,200, 1,500 yards all the way around us. And you could almost call where the deer were going to get up out of those cattails based on the wind. You know, we had a north wind, so we were looking at potholes based on that, and there would be a buck in almost every single one of them bedded the exact same way.
Yeah, so we'll put up a little graphic here, a sample map of let's say a north wind, and you got multiple potholes spread out. We'll find a map, satellite image showing that. So then mark on that map, and you can explain, Jared, kind of talk through where each buck would bed based on a north wind.
Yep. Yeah, we'll show that in the map. But yeah, that was really cool to see. And you know, pretty much all week we're just jokingly saying, "Oh, there's probably a buck bedded right there because the wind's blowing that way." And there was a buck bedded there, and we just, if we would have acted on that, like, you know, go with your instinct, like, just think about it. It just makes perfect sense. You know, we did it the last hunt on the buck that I almost shot. We walked right past that pothole, and me and Caden both said, "There's probably a buck bedded right there." And there was a freaking buck bedded right where we said there would be one. So it's like, if you just, you know, we said that we wish we could have a couple more days, because I think the tactic is to get up early in the morning, get up on a high knob where you can see, and just glass all these edges of marshes and just watch where these bucks go into based on the wind. And then you can make a plan on that. And really, it's tough to do, but you pretty much have to hunt them with just an off wind to get on, you know, get within range on their side of the marsh. You're going to be splitting hairs with the wind to get close to them. So it's for sure a challenge. I mean, it's not easy to do it all.
Well, yeah, Jared nailed it. I wish we would have changed our tactics a little sooner, or gone with our gut a little sooner, because he's right. We did, pretty much all of us intellectually knew what the right strategy was, but only one of us was willing to adapt and overcome. So kudos to Jared for almost making it happen. And
almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades.
Horseshoes and hand grenades, that's right. But now we know. And if we come back, or if you guys out there, if you're going to hunt a spot like we're talking about, open terrain, maybe some potholes, little cattail marshes, or whatever, little pockets of cover, I think you could probably treat that the same way. If you had little islands of scrubby brush, you'd probably treat that the same way as like a little cattail marsh, and they're going to bed based on the wind, and you could hunt it just like kind of how we're talking about. So learn from our mistakes, don't get stuck in your ways, adapt your tactics, and get outside your comfort zone, and I think you'll probably have a successful hunt.
Yep. I think that's probably a good spot to end it right there.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen the videos from this year and last year in North Dakota, they're pretty good, and you can kind of compare and contrast how we did on public land when we were inside our comfort zone. We all tagged out.
Yeah.
Me, you, and Carl.
Yep.
We all tagged out, and then this year,
none of us tagged out.
we goose egged. So anyway, that's it. We'll catch you guys next time.